There. So thank you for joining in. Today's video, we're going to talk about the interest rate setting policy. Now, it seems there are so many predictions out there right now on where it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be adjusting their Fed funds rate to. Now, this is a very interesting topic to talk about because it was just a few months ago that you couldn't find a single person out there who would have believed that the Federal Reserve is not going to cut rates in 2024. In fact, it was like, I don't know, 7, 8 rate cuts or something that were supposed to be coming in 2024. And then it's obviously wasn't going to be that much, as inflation was not going to be coming down to the Fed's 2% target, although we know from the studies that I have done it's not a target, it's actually in 2% inflation rate over time, but we'll discuss that here in a minute. Nobody knows exactly where it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be adjusting their rate policies to, because nobody really understands the Federal Reserve and what their strategy truly is. Now, if we were to hear the mainstream media or even hearing the economist out there talking about average inflation rate and what that average inflation rate is and how to predict what the average inflation rate is, then we would have a much better understanding of where it is that we think the Federal Reserve is going to be going with their monetary policy. Most people think it's going to be due to an election or something of that nature. Now, I'm going to read this to you. Then we're going to break down a bunch of these other things that are happening within the Federal Reserve speaking, right? Like their words themselves, okay? Now, this one right here, this is something that everybody has heard. I say it in every single video that I have done for the last 4 years, but it's one of the most important speeches that you could go and read because it was very, very telling of what was going to come to the Federal Reserve. Now, this is a speech given by John Williams, November 30th, 2018, Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World. Go and Google this speech, read it for yourself. It is so telling, right? Because it tells the problem right off, like what the Federal Reserve was really experiencing, right? And so, where are my glasses at? Oh, here they are. Now, I'm going to go back a little ways into this speech, and this is kind of towards the beginning, but this is what it says. As a starting point, it is useful to travel back in time to the 1980s and 1990s when inflation targeting was introduced, right? So this is something to understand. Inflation targeting was introduced. This is where the Federal Reserve attempts to go for a 2% target on inflation. If inflation runs above 2%, they bring policy down to touch that target. If it runs underneath, then again, they try to stimulate the economy to bring inflation back up to the 2% target, right? Now, this is in 1980s and 90s when inflation targeting was introduced. The problem at the time was a high and variable inflation that contributed to macroeconomic instability and unmourned inflation expectations. This was the problem back then, which in turn fueled high and variable inflation. To break this cycle, this vicious cycle, right, numerous central banks instituted inflation targeting, or variants thereof, with the focus on bringing inflation down to a low level and fostering the establishment of stable, well-anchored inflation expectations. This strategy worked extraordinarily well in the decade preceding the global financial crisis, as central banks were able to achieve remarkably low and stable inflation, leading to a positive feedback loop between inflation and well-anchored inflation expectations. Today, we face an altogether different set of problems stemming from a very low neutral interest rate. That is, the short-term real interest rate consistent with an economy operating at its potential alongside low and stable inflation. Ironically, the problem we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. They needed an inflation expectation that is running too high in order to achieve their monetary policies. Now, that speech goes on to talk about average inflation targeting, right, as one of the ways of dealing with it. And the Federal Reserve has plenty of documents talking about average inflation targeting, right? And so when you hear about the Fed's target, it's an average inflation rate over time, and it's not very clear of what that means. Now, this is coming from, and I'm just going to kind of jump around here. A lot of this stuff you're going to have to Google and go and read for yourself, but I'm just going to kind of bring you the information here so that you can kind of see what it is that I am seeing. All right. Now, this is Fed's new inflation targeting policy seeks to maintain well-anchored inflation expectations. Now, this was dated April 6th, 2021. Now, the important part about this is that the Fed's new inflation targeting policy seeks to maintain well-anchored inflation expectations. It's all about your expectations and whether or not you feel that inflation is going to be coming in the future. If you have too low of inflation expectation, it's going to interfere with the Federal Reserve's monetary policy, as we heard from John Williams, right? Now, the 2007-9 global financial crisis packed in an economic punch that led the Federal Reserve to its first ever monetary policy framework review. The Fed concluded this effort by announcing a major change in its policy strategy, moving from what was been described as flexible inflation targeting to flexible average inflation targeting. The change reflects lessons learned over time over the countries and represents an evolution of the framework to better adapt to monetary policy to the challenges of a low inflation and low interest rate environment. See the problem here? Low inflation, there's challenges, there's problems. All right. Monetary policy evolution. The Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC, lowered its policy rate, the Fed funds rate, to near zero in response to the financial crisis. This is talking back in 2007, 2009. It also decided to keep an ample level of reserves in the banking system, changing the way monetary policy guides the Fed funds rate. The Fed also expanded its toolkit and communication practices. This is very important to understand because the communication practices is really where the monetary policy lies. With balance sheet policy supported by forward guidance. Forward guidance refers to the commitment by the central bank on a path of their policy rate. The FOMC issued its first statement on long-run goals and policy strategy in 2012 and has subsequently amended it in 2019. The statement included the Fed's first explicit commitment to inflation rate of 2% as measured by the annual change in the price index for personal consumption expenditures, the PCE. This strategy is often referred to as flexible inflation targeting. All right. Now, I'm not going to continue to bore you with it. I just wanted to make sure that, we hear about how it is that the Federal Reserve was about ready to be, how it was that they were going to be conducting themselves when it comes to the interest rate setting policy. All right, now this is dated January 10th, 2022, average inflation targeting in the financial crisis recovery. Now, this is important to understand because it's really talking about what happens when you run into the lower bound of zero. Now, researchers in 2020 have analyzed how a low, neutral, or natural interest rate combined with a zero lower bound of the nominal Fed funds rate makes it more difficult for the Fed to resolve the trade-offs between the dual mandate goals of stabilizing inflation and achieving maximum employment. In response to this environment, average inflation targeting, AIT, emerged as a possible strategy to mitigate the effects of the zero lower bound. Right? The Federal Reserve can't drop interest rates past zero. It just no longer stimulates the economy. They ran out of monetary policy. This is where they're like, crap, we need to do something about this. Let's take on average inflation targeting. All right. The FOMC incorporated average inflation targeting in its updated statement on the long-run goals on monetary policy strategy at its conclusion of its year-long framework, the Board of Governors in 2020. Now, this is coming from, hold on one second here, guys. This is coming from Jerome Powell. Let me see what was it. Oops, did I miss it? Where is it at? Oh, there it is. All right. Now, this is coming from Jerome Powell. Let me get the date on it. I think it was August, if I remember right. August of 2020. And they had just changed. Okay, this is New Economic Challenges in the Fed's Monetary Policy Review given by Jerome Powell, August 27th, 2020. And now in this, they had just changed the policy to this average inflation targeting. All right. And let me get down in here to where it gets important real quick because it's down here a little ways. There we go. All right. So this is talking about the changes. We have also made important changes with regard to the price stability side of our mandate. Our long-run goals continues to be an inflation rate of 2%. This is the long-run goals, right? Our statement emphasizes that our actions to achieve both sides of our dual mandate will be most effective if the long-term inflation expectations remained well anchored at 2%. However, if inflation runs below 2% following economic downturns but never moves above 2% when the economy is strong, then over time inflation will average less than 2%. You know, this really is pretty interesting to think about because like how many people are just like the Federal Reserve screwed up, they have inflation, the Federal Reserve is an inflationary thing, right? But right here they were talking about, man, if we have issues with this, if the inflation does not reach that 2% target, we are going to be in trouble here. We're going to have issues with it, right? And then you think about like Donald Trump screaming at the end of his administration, there's no inflation, the Fed should be printing money. How much was he lowering the inflation expectation by screaming that out there? I mean, it was just like, it's incredible to think about like the inflation expectation and how impactful that is on the economy. All right. So it goes on to say here that, however, let me go back and read it. However, if inflation runs below 2% following economic downturns but never moves above 2% even when the economy is strong, then over time inflation will average less than 2%. Households and businesses will come to expect this result, meaning that inflation expectations will tend to move below our inflation goal and pull realized inflation down. To prevent this, right? To prevent this outcome and adverse dynamics that could ensue, our new statement indicates that we will seek seek to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time. Therefore, following periods of inflation has been running below 2%, appropriate monetary policy will likely aim to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time. That means they're not going for a 2% inflation, right? It means they're going for an average 2% inflation over time, which means that they are likely to aim higher than 2%, right? This is so crystal clear to me as to why the Federal Reserve is conducting themselves the way they are. I mean, you think about it. How many people were screaming just a few years ago that the Federal Reserve is keeping interest rates too low, causing inflation to take place? Yes, that's exactly what they were doing. They were trying to create an inflationary scenario, and then not only that, then they were trying to anchor inflation expectations at a higher level. The problem they needed to solve was the inflation expectation that was persistently too low rather than too high. This is the problem that they were facing back in 2018. I think they're fixing their problems now. Right? I mean, people say that they have problems. No, they had problems. They're fixing their problems with this inflation expectation that is now persistently higher, and they're trying to keep it that way. In seeking to achieve, let's see, we already read that, didn't we? Okay, no. This is where it gets really funny. Okay. And this is why I wanted to bring this up, because this is really where people are wanting to know how it is that they can predict where it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be going with their Fed funds rate, because it's not a 2% target. You can just go ahead and wipe that right off the table. It's not, once they get there, that doesn't mean that they're going to do anything about it. They've already said this, right? And this was reiterated. Like, this isn't me just saying, like, pulling up a bunch of past information. It was just a couple of weeks ago that Jerome Powell was testifying in front of Congress, and they straight up asked him, like, are you going to like keep this monetary policy of this average inflation? Because they even said it right there. They acknowledged that the Fed was not going for 2%, but going for an average inflation rate, right? And even the congressman was confused. I mean, you should go back and watch the video I did on it. It was really good. But even the congressman was confused. And Jerome's response was very crystal clear. He basically says, yeah, we're not going to address that until the end of the year when we go and review our monetary policy. Until then, we are conducting ourselves this way, right? There's no change. That's why it was just like, it doesn't matter if it's an election year, it doesn't matter if there's, whatever. This is their monetary policy until they review it again at the end of the year. And that's exactly what he told the congressman just a couple of weeks ago. So this statement that he was making years ago is still holding true today, right? In seeking to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time, we are not tying ourselves to a particular mathematical formula that defines the average. Thus, our approach could be viewed as a flexible form of average inflation targeting. Our decision about appropriate monetary policy will continue to reflect a broad array of considerations and will not be dictated by any formula. There's no point in even trying to figure it out because they don't have a formula to figure it out. Right? They don't have one. Of course, if excessive inflationary pressures were to build or inflation expectations were to ratchet above levels consistent with our goal, we would not hesitate to act. All right. So now they are getting their monetary policy back. They got the Fed funds rate back up. They're no longer near the zero lower bound. They have inflation expectation that is running persistently high instead of persistently too low. And nobody knows about what average inflation rate is. So, all right. Where's okay, so from the average inflation targeting, was it on here? Oh no, here we go. This is what it is. Okay, so this is where I think I found the closest that we could understand what it is. And there's probably some people out there who could probably come up with a chart or something to try and like come up with in real time what this is, right? Because this is really what it comes down to, is that without a mathematical formula to figure out what average inflation rate over time really is, then how is it that we even know if the Federal Reserve has achieved their goal if they don't have a mathematical formula for us to just kind of go with? Everybody starts assuming, they telling me like, they give me like all these numbers. They talk about how the Federal Reserve is just lying, all kinds of stuff, right? But now listen to this, because we can get a kind of a clue of what it is that they're thinking, right? From this. This is hold on guys, what is this I'm looking at? This is titled Long Run Average Inflation, October 17th, 2023. So this isn't even that long ago. Like this is what, 6-7 months ago or whatever. It was not even that long. 5 months ago. All right. So this is it's micro minute. It says at the top here. This is coming out of what Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. Right? And I'll try and go and find links for all this stuff and put it in the description after I'm done. But it was just so much stuff here, and I think it's just as easy to Google it. If you're really interested in finding this information, you'll be willing to Google it and go get it. All right. So this is what it says at the very bottom here, because this is going to give us a clue of how this average inflation rate can actually be figured out. All right, it says here, notably, in its update to the FOMC, the FOMC did not define the window of time over which it would be looking back to assess progress towards its goal. All right, so they admit it right there. We don't have this mathematical formula. By looking back far enough, it is possible to identify a starting dates where average inflation through the present day has come in exactly at target. Now think about that for just a second, right? Let me read it again. By looking back far enough, right? By looking back far enough, it is possible to identify a starting date where average inflation rate through today has come in exactly at target, at that 2%. For example, and he leaves a chart here. For example, when considering inflation from October of 2008 through August of 2023, Headline PCE inflation averaged 2% per year on average, right on target. Now, think about that for just a second. We incorporate all the inflation that we have experienced today. We take it all the way back to like last year. You can't find no 2% there. You can't find it in the previous year. You can take it back to 2017. Nope. Can't find no 2% average inflation over those years. You keep going back to 2010. Still haven't found it. Getting closer. You get back to 2008, October of 2008, and boom, you found 2% average inflation rate over time. Right? You see where now we have a target. We know exactly where they're at. Now, if somebody was smart enough to figure out how or where the current inflation rate is today, and you incorporate all the previous inflation that we've experienced here over the last few months and years and, almost going back decade, and you can find where the 2% average inflation rate date is. Now, obviously, it's not going to be October of 2008 any longer. It might be, January of 2009. I don't know, right? But it's somewhere in there. And if we could figure out where that is, then we could have a better idea of what it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be doing, because that's the average inflation rate over time. That's the 2%. If we start seeing that 2% moving closer to us, where the date is no longer October of 2008, but now it's 2010 or something of that nature, then we understand that the date is moving ever closer to us, to the current level, to the current time. Say, for example, we get inflation readings today at 2%, with the Fed funds rate at 2%. Like they're neutral on the Fed funds rates, it's at neutral, meaning they're not accommodating or restricting the economy. We got inflation at 2%. We got the average inflation rate at 2%. Like everything is exactly where it needs to be. It's like the absolute sweet spot, right? Then they can move to forward-looking average inflation, right? Because right now they're in backward-looking average inflation. So pretty soon they could use stuff like R star, or where it is that people are, seeing like the long-dated U.S. Treasuries or something of that nature. This will then begin to flip, but I don't think we're there yet. I still think we're in the backward-looking average inflation targeting over time, and this is how they are describing it. Like, no, I don't know who else is out there who has figured this stuff out like I have. Like, I mean, I'm showing you all this is directly straight from the Fed itself. I mean, you think about it, all the way back in 2018, the second option is average inflation targeting, whereby the central bank purposefully aims to achieve above target inflation rate in good times, when the lower bound is not constrained. Properly designed and implemented, such an overshoot can offset the inflation undershoot during bad times, so the long run average inflation rate and inflation expectations are in line with the target. This is what they're doing, guys. And so understanding how the inflation expectation is really where the critical part of the monetary policy's functioning, right? If that falls, they're done. They're cooked, right? They cannot conduct themselves in an appropriate fashion. They talk about it all the way back into 2018 and even before that. If you go and look at Ben Bernanke's speech, and I got that in here too. If you go back and look at Ben Bernanke's speech dated from 2002, we're talking 20 years ago. They were talking about running into the lower bound, having no more monetary policy, having to use forward guidance. He describes it using a gold machine, right? And with the guy who invents a gold machine, and he could produce as much gold at will with very little cost or energy. The moment that this information gets out to the market, the price of gold would plummet even before the guy produces a single ounce of gold or even has the machine to do it. Just the credible threat alone would be enough to move the markets. And this is what the Ben Bernanke was saying is going to be a monetary policy tool coming in the future to prevent deflationary and to prevent the deflationary powers from overwhelming the monetary policy. Right? I mean, to me, I'm not somebody who even cares. Which way it goes. Up, down, or sideways, I don't really care. I don't, to me, If real estate takes off, cool, I'm trying to buy a house. If it crashes, cool, I'm looking to buy investments anyway, right? So I'll be like, positioned for that. If the whole monetary policy or monetary system completely collapses, I'm sitting on some gold and silver because I've hedged myself against something of that kind of scenario. Do I believe in cryptocurrencies? Absolutely. I'm buying stocks, I'm buying bonds, I'm saving money. I'm doing it all. Right? There is no position in which that I am not taking advantage of because nobody knows what exactly is going to be happening into the future. But as far as like people's plans, and that's one of the reasons why I left the article about real estate in the descriptions, is because if you go and you just read that article, which I was just kind of reading on my local area around here, talking about how the inventory is increasing but still dramatically undersupplied, right? And in that, he even says the Federal Reserve plans on doing 3 rate cuts this year. No, they don't plan on doing that. There is no plan, there's no forward guidance, there is nothing out there that is saying that, right? Now, there is the credible threat, which is different from forward guidance. Forward guidance is when they actually make the statement, we are going to be cutting at the next meeting, right? Maybe even not knowing exactly how much, whatever, but if they make that statement, we are going to do this. Now, doing a plot map is not a prediction of Fed rate cuts, right? What that is saying is that according to the current market conditions, this is where we expect rates to be. Things change, always change. Nothing stays the same. So as the Federal Reserve was watching inflation falling dramatically, yes, they had those predictions, but that was based on the current conditions, right? They know as well as everybody else that there is no way that the conditions are going to be the same once they get there, right? That's why they are data dependent, right? But even on top of all that, the 2% inflation target doesn't exist. There's no such thing, right? And it's not part of the monetary policy coming from the Federal Reserve. What they have is an average inflation rate over time, and they have an inflation expectations, but they do not have a 2% target. That is no longer the case. And so predicting where the Federal Reserve is going to be going with their Fed funds, it's better to understand their dual mandate, right? Where they have full employment and low and stable inflation. Well, as long as everybody has a job, regardless of how bad you hear it taking place in the economy, layoffs and bankruptcies and all the harshness that is happening out there, the unemployment isn't rising significantly yet, right? Once it does, then they will adjust their monetary policy, but they don't. They like, people are like, well, the election, well, the housing market, well, all this stuff. And I was like, no, none of that stuff. They have low and stable prices and full employment. That's their mandate, period, right? And everything that I have read, all these documents, everything that comes from it is definitely in line with the dual mandate. This is what they are attempting to achieve. It's not a great thing. This is where it really comes down to, is that it's not your friend, right? It's not there to be your friend, and it's not your enemy, right? It just is. And so if you just understand it as an is, then you can position yourself with little expectations of anything else out there other than understanding for yourself that there is a monetary policy that is being conducted right now that is so different than the mainstream media, the narrative, than most like economists out there who are talking. I mean, I've tried to call them out when I see them, when I see the propaganda. I've pinpointed it all the way down to Time magazine, as well as, I mean, I see it everywhere, but when I saw it in Time magazine, I was like, that's it, you guys are done. I'm calling you out on this, right? And so this is it, man. All right. Wow, I really went off for a half an hour. How many people are up in here? 177 people with 85 likes. Go hit that like button and we'll get more people to join in on this. All right, I'm just going to cruise up here to the very beginning. All right, Steve A says first, hey, nice to see you. Growing life organic last. All right, Steve A, what's up? Glad to see you. Let's go from the future is conservative. All right. Steve A, all-nighter, no cuts this year. Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with you. The only thing that I would kind of expect, maybe, not for reasons of economic purposes, not to like, oh man, we have to do this, for certain conditions that are out there. The Federal Reserve could possibly lower rates to make sure that they have that credible threat established, like to to make sure that they don't get the perception that they're crying wolf or something of that nature, right? So they might do a symbolic like type of rate cut, but I don't think that's going to have any kind of meaningful aspect. And I'm not trying to like, cover my bases in case they do or something like that. I'm thinking more of the credible threat line of things. I don't think that any kind of rate cuts are really coming to try and boost the economy or deal with inflation or anything like that, because the target inflation doesn't exist, right? I know this, right? It's a 2% average inflation rate over time, and figuring that part out is going to be more important. Yeah. All right, buy some Bitcoin and gold and silver. All right, hey, Johnny, Kevin from Lakeland, Florida. It's great to see you. Eric, no rate cuts for 5 years, you guys. All right, so I'm gonna cruise down here for a little ways, and we're going to the bottom and see if there's any questions. Anybody got any questions for me on this? Like anything on any? I mean, there's so much to cover here. I know I couldn't have possibly covered it all. Everyone is thinking there will be one or no rate cuts. Very few are considering rate hikes. Now, the rate hike, I don't think I would necessarily anticipate a rate hike unless like, I mean, it could happen if the neutral interest rate, this would really get me to believe that there would be a rate hike, is if the neutral interest rate really begins to rise. Now, there is a lot of predictions on where the neutral interest rate is, but nobody knows exactly what that neutral interest rate is. And again, like the neutral interest rate is where the Federal Reserve is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy, right? It's neutral. And so if the neutral interest rate, which is not set, I mean, it fluctuates just as everything else does. If that neutral interest rate begins to rise and rise significantly and gets closer to the Fed funds rate, that will make it less restrictive on the economy, which is probably one of the reasons why we are experiencing a lot of the economic good times that people are reporting out there. Like, it's amazing that you can see evidence of like things in growth at the same time, mass layoffs and defaults and all that other stuff. What are they doing over there? Oh, they must have come to just get something. Okay, but at the same time, you see all this economic harshness, but yet you see this growth, right? Well, you think about that. If that neutral interest rate is rising, right, and getting ever closer to the Fed funds rate and making it less restrictive on the economy, then that would be somewhat stimulating, right? Not stimulating, but less restrictive would be in a when you feel the environment should be restrictive, but it's not. That's probably one of the reasons why, is because it's becoming less restrictive. And if that continues to be the case, if inflation expectation was running persistently higher, then I think that would pull up the neutral interest rate. And if that does continue going into the future, like significantly, then I think, okay, yes, then I think the Fed would start to raise rates on account of that, right? To stay away from that neutral rate. Because if they allow the neutral interest rate to rise all the way up to the Fed funds rate, and it actually was to go above it, then they would be in a stimulating environment. If the neutral interest rate would happen to move that far up, I don't think it will, but I'm just saying, what if. And anyhow, moving on. Brody, with 250 plus viewers, we should have more likes than this. Yes, we should. We're up to 107. I think we'll be at 200 here before too long. Do you listen to Daniel D. Martino Booth? I used to. To be honest, Carrie, I don't listen to anybody anymore. I don't listen to any other YouTubers. I don't really listen to any one particular news source. Really, what I am following is a lot of Federal Reserve documents, monetary policy strategies, past theories, especially Cantillon, right? This has been such a helpful read, right? For anybody who is really looking to kind of dive into economics to try and understand economic forces, Cantillon's essay on economic theory is so good, right? To me, it really is like, it really sets the foundation for economic forces for you to understand why it is that manufacturing bases travel and move around. Now, granted, I mean, he's talking about horses and wagons and, stuff like that in this book. and you know, we have cell phones and airplanes and, you know, the internet and digital currencies. Things are so much different now than Cantillon's essay, or back in Cantillon's day, because he wrote this thing back in like the, you know, 1700s or something like that. I can't even remember what year he wrote it. 300 years ago. But the point being is that there is stuff inside that book that is like can't change. It's like the laws of gravity, you know. I mean, these are things that are just never going to change. It's human nature that causes a lot of stuff that happens out there. And by reading this essay, especially the increase and decrease of money to the state, right? There's 3 chapters in there. Those 3 chapters are absolutely critical. And back. And you can find a link to this down in the description of this video. It's an Amazon affiliate link. Anything that you put in your cart for the next 24 hours, I'll also get a commission for. And you don't have to buy this essay, right? This essay is absolutely for free at the Mises Institute. Just, you know, Google Cantillon essay on economic theory. Okay, moving on here. But no, but I've listened to, answer the question. I have listened to her in the past, but I would say probably the last time I've ever listened to anything that, with any kind of significant thought to it, it was years ago. It was like literally 3 years ago or something. All right, my barber says my hair is in a recession. All right, let's get to the point as soon as possible with all due respect. Dude, I don't know what it is that you need. I mean, there is no quick answer to this. Like, if you need to know what average inflation rate is, then you need to understand all the little parts that caused all this. So, like, a half an hour even isn't enough. I just threw a ton of information at you, a ton of it, describing to a T, right down to where it is that the Federal Reserve had changed their monetary policy, why they are doing it. I showed you the examples of how it is that they're trying to figure it out. Like, I don't know anybody else who has conducted anything of this nature, right? Like, this is probably one of the best free courses that you are getting right now on monetary policy that nobody else is explaining. I mean, if you want to go and search through hundreds, literally hundreds of Fed documents to isolate it down to the handful that I have, go for it. You know how many hours I've spent doing this? Man, it's like, it's almost insulting. Yeah. Does AI know anything about economics? Of course. Like, to me, that's all. Like, I don't understand how AI is scary. Like, I mean, yeah, you can go ahead and let it scare the hell out of you. You can go in like Terminator kind of style thought, you know, or something of that nature. But to me, it's not that. To me, it's like gonna be helpful and awesome and great. Like, I'm into very minimal stuff. Like, I have no ambitions to get, like, I want a new Camaro. I'm going to get one, right? But I have really no ambitions to drive new cars around. Like, I like this old 99 Ford Explorer. I really like my old Toyota and truck. Like, it was very inconspicuous. Never had a problem with them. They ran great. You know, that's the kind of thing that you know, like, I'm not into material possessions or, you know, fancy things. Like, I'm just not into that kind of stuff. So to me, like, seeing higher, fancier technologies and stuff like that, I don't let that kind of thing ruin or rule or really mess with my life a whole lot, other than what I allow it for, the conveniences that it is. Now, I can see very much where it can rule your life. Like, you can allow it to, like, really screw with you and you know, mess with the outcome of what it is that you had truly expected for your life, if you allow it to be that way. Now, I'm not scared of it. Like, I'm just simply just not scared of it. Like, to be honest, I want a car that'll take me to work. And this is like, great, man. It'll allow me to do other things with my time other than drive. I like driving. I want to drive the new Camaro. But if, you know, if I could hop in a vehicle and it would take me to work and I don't have to drive it and allows me to do something else with my time, hell yeah. Right? I mean, I find my time valuable, you know, and what I do with it valuable. And driving to work is a waste of time, especially if I could do something else with it. Like, going for a drive to relax is different. Right? All right, moving on. That is too hot in this car. Moving down here. Do you have no concerns about the fact that AI potentially makes people with limited skill sets much less economically valuable? No, I don't. I think AI, I think the advancements of technologies is a great thing. Like, I find it to be very great. The more conveniences we have, like, you think about it, what is wealth? Wealth is food, conveniences, and pleasures of life, right? And I feel that those things would not be invented if it wasn't for conveniences or pleasures of life. And now, does it, take away from a skill set? Sure, right? I mean, but, I mean, cars took away from the need to have horses. Well, what about the skill set of being a, you know, whatever they call it, fair, people who shoe horses and stuff like that. I mean, how many people used to exist that did that skill, but they didn't need them anymore because of the advancements of, cars and stuff. They find other things to do. You freeze up your time to do other things, right? To become better at, your passions and to provide the world with more unique things that are better suited from your personal skill sets that you have developed from inside of you, like, allows you to be the artist or the craftsman or the gardener or the, whatever it is that you want, right? That's what I love about it. It's just like, you know like, why waste your time doing mundane things? It's better to do, it's better to follow, what it is that thing that's in you, and going, and, like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I like going to work, like, I like my job, I kind of like doing sales, but if I could do this 100% of the time because this is my real passion, I would do it, right? I would do it in a heartbeat, but it's not stable enough for me to provide for my family in that kind of fashion. Work gives me stable income, gives me insurance, gives me, networking capabilities, gives me information. I mean, I use my job for more than just the pay. I use it for a lot. I mean, it means a lot to me, and I give it that meaning. I mean, I didn't have to. I could, like, be out here pouring out as much information, covering all these different platforms, trying to monetize every word that I put out there. But, I mean, that would, I guess that would be fun. I mean, I don't know. I mean, all right. Yes, but there are hardly any horses these days. Right, I know. And all those people who used to shoot those horses can't shoot them anymore. And so what did they do? They went off and found other things to do. They started, like, building things that were not horseshoes. All right. I've heard that argument before. I don't think it carries water. All right. Sellers accepted our offer for a 2-1 buy down, first year 4%, second year 5%, third year to 6.62. Any advice? Booney's Bear, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I'd have to think about that for a while just to understand where it is. Like, I mean, I would be looking at it from my own personal position anyway. What will all the human beings do? They're gonna do fun stuff, man. You go and enjoy yourself. Go and follow your passions. Go make art. Go do stuff. I mean, you don't have, like, there's gonna be people who love building houses. They're gonna still build houses, right? I mean, people need houses built. There's people who like to do that, and I mean, they really have a passion for building houses, and they're gonna build houses, right? Same thing with people who like to farm. People who farm really enjoy farming. They're gonna farm a lot. They're gonna farm even more, and it's like, when when you think about a machine coming out there to do all the work, yeah, man, somebody else has to have the idea of making it happen. And I tell you, it's when it comes to the return to Renaissance, like, how much better is live music over recorded music? Like, will you want to sit inside of an audience looking at a stage that has completely computer generated stuff? Or are you going to want to sit there and listen to somebody who's strumming an acoustic guitar? Right? There's some things that can't change, right? That's like, you can make it as artificial and realistic as you want. It doesn't take it's still not the real thing. right? It'll never be the real thing. Some things will just never change, right? And that's the point that I'm trying to get at, is that you don't have to find yourself doing mundane things in order to have an existence, right? We can have an existence that's providing wonderful products and services and things that are handmade, right, by us unique individuals. It doesn't matter if a machine makes it the same or better or not. People want it from the personal aspect of it, right? Like, I remember a friend of mine had shredded like the thin Safeway bags, grocery bags, and built and made, knitted together, crocheted together this wonderful carry handbag. And I thought that was the coolest thing I had ever seen. I was just like, and people were like, yeah, man, those things are everywhere, like people make those things. I'd never seen one before, right? I always thought she had done something that was really unique and new, and I was like, thought that was cool as hell, right? Only because she had done it herself, right? And I found more value in that than any other, like, made bag out there. That's the point that I'm kind of getting at. It frees people up to do what it is that they truly want to do with their life. And I think it's possible. I mean, I don't think that's, I mean, think about all the things that, technology has already taken away from, past jobs. And, people find other things to do. There's plenty of work to do. There is no lack of work, that's for sure. All right, do you think the message we got from Powell this week was about him telling us higher rates for longer? I'm thinking they are worried about gold prices going higher. I don't think they're worried about that. I don't think they're worried about gold prices going higher. I don't think they're worried about anything of that nature. I mean, they're worried about making sure that inflation expectation remains well anchored. That's what they're worried about. And as long as they have the inflation rate coming down to somewhat more of a stable number, right? That's the mandate. That's the dual mandate, that they have to have low and stable prices. It doesn't say anything about having a 2% mandate. I just said low and stable prices and full employment. That's it. Like, that is, outside of that, I don't think they're worried about anything. Nothing from anything that I have read out of their monetary policy says anything different. Like, when they conduct themselves at the lower bound of zero, they're not going, oh my gosh, we're going to end up causing all these house prices to move up. They acknowledge that's what happens. They acknowledge the irrational exuberance. They acknowledge the fact that it's taken place. But it doesn't seem to change the fact that there is an ever-growing, wedge between the rich and the poor. The inequality is getting worse. The ability to own a house is getting harder, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things that go into that. That doesn't seem to be their concern. And, what gets me about this whole thing is, like, how it is that people feel that the Federal Reserve could do anything about that. Like, they can't. I mean, they can make the houses more expensive by by making the loans even more restrictive, right? In a more restrictive environment. And in that case, then maybe possibly you could bring the house prices down, but that doesn't bring inventory to the market, right? I mean, what you're looking for is more inventory. You have a supply of houses and you have a demand coming from the people. There's literally a supply of demand and a supply of houses. The supply of demand is far bigger than the supply of houses. And the only thing you will end up doing by lowering the interest rate is bringing the supply of demand ever bigger, right? In order to bring the supply of homes, you have to bring in more homes. You have to build more homes. And the way that you build more homes is you try to inspire the investors, right, to take advantage of the high prices by building homes to take advantage of the high prices. So high prices will bring in more inventory if it was there significant enough and the builders themselves felt confident that they could sell those houses, right? None of that stuff seems to be taking place. That's why we have low inventory and high demand, and the prices are going to remain elevated. At least in my opinion. All right, I'm going to give it like another 10 minutes and then we're going to call it quits, okay, guys? Can you recommend some reading material that will make the picture more clear? No, I can't, the novice wanderer. I can't do it because there is nothing out there that is going to describe this in detail, how this is operating. There is nothing out there, literally nothing, nowhere, except for the Uneducated Economist and all these videos that I have put together. So you can go back and watch them from the last, 7 years that I've been doing this, or 5 years, or whatever it is. Or you can go and read these documents that I've shown you, right? Take on the idea that there is an average inflation rate, not a target, right? Abandon the idea of it. Don't think about it from a political fashion, because it certainly doesn't have anything to do with an election year, because there's nothing within these documents that talk about the election, talk about a Democratic or Republican, doesn't talk about any of that stuff, not one bit, right? So if you can exclude all that stuff out of your mind and then go through these documents and just kind of read them and then, take into some of the considerations that I have said, then you might be able to figure it out. But there's no place you can go to. There's like literally there is nothing that I can find that describes this stuff that I have described anywhere. Like, I've pieced all this stuff together for years now, and I keep adding another little piece to the story every couple of months. In fact, tomorrow, if you want to, you can just start join in on the membership. Like, it's $1 a month. We do a members only live stream once a week, sometimes twice a week. Tomorrow we're going to be covering the more recent speech given by Christopher Waller. It's What's the Rush, talking about the interest rates and where it is that he feels that they should be going. There's a link to it down in the description. I mean, I suggest everybody go read it, but if a lot of times the Fed speak is very difficult to understand. And that's what the point of like the videos are, the member only videos, is to try and break those speeches down to make it a little better for all of us to internalize, so that we can make the best decisions for ourselves. All right. It's unprecedented. The old rules and the ways are out. All right. Your thoughts on the feasibility of potential first-time home buyers over the next few years? It's going to be difficult. Like, here's the thing about it, is just like, first-time home buyers are having a hell of a time, because, if you have like, I forget what the job now, like how much you have to earn. It's like well over 100,000. Oh, the medium house now requires like a median income of like $130,000 a year or some shit like that. I can't believe it. Like, I'm like, holy crap. Like, the average income to buy a house has to be $130,000 a year. Now, I know for some people who live in some cities out there, they'd be like, yeah, that's what everybody makes, bro. Not where I live. Not, nobody I know makes that much money. None. Like, I mean, I bust my ass on everything I did, and even on the best year with YouTube ad revenue and the sponsors and everything I did, still don't think I pulled in $130,000, right? I mean, it was a pretty significant year, but that was like everything. And I know how hard it is that I have to put in effort to try and even come close. And that's including my wife's income as well, and calling bingo and, all the other stuff that I do, how hard it is to earn $100,000. Like, I don't know how the hell anybody who's working at a hardware store and working at the school as a teacher's assistant, like, I don't know how those two jobs are ever going to ever buy a house, ever. Like, they won't. They just simply won't, right? However, there are so many ways to make money, right? Money flies everywhere. You just got to learn how to go out there and get it. And sometimes it takes years to figure that out, but once you do, there's a lot of money to be earned. There's a lot of revenue avenues of income that you can take, right? So considering the position that we are now in economically, with all these different ways of making money, especially when it comes to the internet, then it gives people who are working at a hardware store and teacher assistant and doing YouTube and calling bingo, right, gives them a chance to now be able to buy a house, right? But it's not going to be easy for the person who's just like, man, I got a decent job. I work 9 to 5, whatever. It's like, that ain't enough. That ain't enough. You want to buy a new car too? Now you're done. You ain't getting a house. Oh, hell no. I mean, I drive a 99 Ford Explorer. I can't buy a new car. Are you guys crazy? I mean, come on. People are like, get out of that old car. Get yourself something decent to drive. No, thank you. I'd rather buy this house, right? Somebody else who's, driving a really nice car, living in a crappy apartment, maybe that's doing it for them, but that doesn't do it for me. So yeah, the feasibility of it, very low. It's like especially over the next couple of years. You know? Even if they were to lower interest rates right now, bam, right? It takes 18 months before it really takes it, has a full effect on the economy. So even then, 18 months from now, you might start seeing the effects of a lowering of interest rates. Now, it might have an instantaneous impact on the markets, but the real economy, the choices, the decisions, the things that we have going on, it will take that long before it really starts to impact the economy. Some people will get to take advantage of it, but there will be very few in the early days. It takes a long time before it really starts to happen. Yeah, next few days, no, it's not coming down. All right. Got 5 more minutes, guys. All right. Well, I'm gonna get some. Well, I'm gonna eat some applesauce. Oh, good for you. All right. I just saw a teacher was doing OnlyFans to make a living. I say, do what you got to do to grind. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's all out there, so I don't know what to say. It's just like, make the money where you can. Simon, you did make enough to buy. No, I don't. Those are feelers, bro. You don't even know. All right. Those ones you saw there, is that the Sunshine Mint? Those are feelers. All right. And I can't speed. Like the car doesn't even go fast enough to speed. All right. How much of our problems is due to nobody going outside and doing anything and instead spending all day on streams, internet in general? I think velocity of money is almost entirely online these days. Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I have things that I have going on. So they were on to go do Easter egg thing over at the church, and I decided to live stream for a few minutes. Yui, it's funny how people looking to buy want a housing crash. Funny thing is, my area, a house just sold for 10,000 over asking price. I don't think anything is going to crash. I agree with you. Who said that? What now, Chris? Yeah, I really agree with you. Like a buddy of mine just sold his house. I mean, it sold in 3 days, all cash. I mean, for asking price. It, it's I just don't see the environment yet that would create the housing crash that a lot of people are anticipating. Like there is areas in this country where you can get a really cheap house. Like that same guy who sold his house here was the guy who bought the house in Missouri, and it was like $32,000 or something that he had paid for it. I forget, it was less than 40. It was like 32, 35, something like that. And so he bought an entire house, but he says Missouri is not exactly the place that you can go and chase money around, right? Because he's, a hustler and, doing business or whatever. But if there's not a lot going on there, then you're going to have a difficult time trying to earn money. So you got to go to where the money is, right? And where you go where the money is, then you find expensive houses. And that's exactly the case that you're going to find just about anywhere in this country. If you got nice neighborhoods that's clean, low crime, and, fairly friendly and stuff like that, guess what? It's probably, and it's a beautiful vacation area too, it's probably going to be pricey, right? But you go into the middle of nowhere where there's no industry and there's no tourism and there's no anything really going on except for maybe cow fields or something of that nature, you're probably not going to find expensive homes in that area. There's not a lot of demand going on in that sort of type of area, right? I mean, so it's all perspective. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's just like I don't try to look at it as going to be a good or bad thing. Like, I mean, it's just more about the position that you need to be in. It's like the weather. Like today's a really nice day, but what's the nice day, right? It's a sunny day, so we get to go out and hang out and, do stuff like that. If it was raining today, it wouldn't really change what it is that I plan on doing, right? Would it make the day better or worse? Well, okay, so I slightly like the sunny weather better for what it is that I got going on today. I mean, it feels better. It's just nice and happy environment, people cutting grass, it smells good. So there's like all this stuff, but it doesn't change anything about what I had going on. Like nothing. Like, especially Oregonians, don't let the weather change them. Like, I mean, if it's raining out, that doesn't make any difference. Like literally makes no difference. If somebody, in fact, we use that to tell whether or not somebody is really wanting to do something, right? Like if you invite somebody to go somewhere and they're like, I don't know, we got to see how the weather is that day. They didn't really want to go, period. Straight up. You can be like, oh, never mind then. No, don't worry about it, right? Because if they are like already using the weather, we already know, okay, well, you don't want to do it because it rains all the time. You don't plan anything without it raining, right? You just assume that that's what it's going to be. And if they're like, oh, well, maybe, I don't know, it depends on the weather, then they didn't want to do it. Straight up, right? And you can just like, you can almost use that for anything, you know, it doesn't even have to be an Oregonian, but all righty, guys, let's see. I got a super chat. Let's go check that out. Man, gone viral, $2. Thank you so much. Good info. Thanks. Well, thank you very much, man. I mean, like I said, this stuff isn't easy, right? And, you know, trying to understand the monetary policy itself is really difficult considering that there is so much noise out there. There is so many ways that you could understand the economy. Like, I mean, you could understand it from, like, I mean, you can view it from anyway, religious, you can review it from government, you can, you know, view it from all kinds of things, right? But ultimately, it's inside. It's you and the way that you are interacting, what you are doing, the decisions that you are making. This is all like the economy is you. You are the economy, right? You interact with things that are going on out there. And so it's better to understand it because, like, really, there's nobody out there who can control the economy because they don't control your decisions. They try to influence them. And if you allow it to happen, it will, especially, you know, political decisions that are made out there. That will be very influential on the decision makings, right? And see, this is where a lot of people end up suffering a lot of the consequences of politics is that they have based a lot of the decisions that they had made off of the information that they were getting from politics. This is scary to think about because now the political choices that are out there are going to influence you because you have made all these decisions, all these choices in your life that are based on these political outcomes. Very, very scary, right? Now, I'm not saying that political decisions don't affect you, right? Because that does happen. But if you are making decisions on your life based on political atmosphere, then you are setting yourself up. You are really setting yourself up. Because there's nobody out there who could ever be voted into place that is going to conduct things appropriate for just you. And there's no way that they can do things that are going to be so appropriate for the masses that you would be included in that. Because the decisions that you have made are definitely yours and unique to you. Just like the decisions that were made that I made for myself, right? Like, you know, a political decision that is made that it starts to impact everybody's lives, the impact to each one of us individually will be different, right? Based on how it is that we have conducted ourselves up to that point. So this is really like better to internalize this stuff, understand it that it's not a good or bad thing. It's like the weather, right? It doesn't change the way that you're going to be conducting yourselves. You understand that it's going to be bad weather, so you have to put an extra coat on, right? You have to, you know, load up on a little bit extra silver, you know, or something of that nature. Like you understand these things, but you don't base it off of these political outcomes out there because I guarantee you they're not going to be the way that you want it. Like never in the history of time has there ever been a political atmosphere that everybody was happy with, ever, right? You have to be happy with the decisions that you have made, knowing the consequences of some of the things that are out there, and you take responsibility for that. You know? Wow. I'm really going off today here. Okay, we're done here. We gotta call it. But God, you got so many comments up in here. Benny, be smarter about making your plans. Yeah, for sure. For the last 6 months, equipment rental yards have been full of equipment, not renting much like before. Yeah. I don't think interest rates are coming down. There needs to be more economic slowdown. Benny, I have. All right. Okay, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for the super chat. We got 242 people watching right now with 168 likes. Thank you so much for hitting that like button. The algorithm loves it as well. Get the video to go spread around for even more people to understand. Go read this information for yourself. I'm going to keep bringing it up and I'm going to keep talking about it. I would love for one of you smart people out there to come up with a chart or a way to figure out what the average inflation rate is over time, considering the current inflation that we are experiencing today, incorporating all the past inflation. I think that would just be awesome if somebody could figure that part out. And then we could judge and see how far out the 2% average inflation rate is from our current timeline. And I think that would be incredibly helpful for understanding monetary policy going into the future. But until then, we have to just kind of take into consideration some of these things that the Federal Reserve has said. Know that the neutral interest rate is not something that is easy to know exactly where it's at, but that it very much influences the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy. So this is how we do it. We have these discussions like this. So I encourage everybody to join the live stream for tomorrow. It's a members only live stream, probably going to do it around 10 or 11 o'clock West Coast time. We'll be covering Christopher Waller's speech, What's the Rush, talking about interest rates and where they're headed. All right, Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.